All right, guys. In this video, we're going to talk about the first part of our unit on energy. Okay, so energy transfer in living things is really, really important. It's definitely something we're going to spend a good bit of time with. And so, a few things that we're going to look at here include glycolysis, ATP, and just the overall importance of energy in living things. So, some questions we want to make sure that we can answer. All right. First, what is the job of ATP? What is ATP? Is it, or what kind of molecule is it? How does it work? That's a very important thing we want to be able to explain. We want to have an overall understanding of glycolysis. Now, I'm going to go into depth with some of the steps, but the big picture is, what does glycolysis start with, and what does it make? What's the overall picture there? We want to know where glycolysis occurs in the cell. It's in a certain part of the cell. It's just a one-word answer. We want to talk about fermentation. We want to know why an organism may do fermentation. We want to know the difference between fermentation and what we're later going to talk about called cell respiration, okay? And then we're going to talk about the two kinds of fermentation. Now, as a kind of review from earlier in the year, right, we talked about the 7 characteristics of living things. And one of those characteristics was that all living things obtain and use energy. So why do they need energy? What's the point? Well, energy keeps you alive. It's it's like the currency, right? The money, the currency that the cell spends in order to carry out the chemical reactions that it needs to make the stuff that it uses day to day. So sugar is great. Sugar is a form of energy, right? We talked about carbohydrates are made of simple sugars and they're great for quick energy, but the sugar itself is not actually the energy molecule, okay? ATP is, so we have to get the ATP from the sugar molecule, and there's a way that we go about doing that. So that's why energy is important. It's the currency that we spend in order to have our chemical reactions move forward. Now, all living things do obtain energy, but they do get it from different places. So there's 3 main classes of organisms that we're going to talk about. There are the autotrophs. Now, the term auto is a bio prefix. It means self. And a troph, all right, so auto means self, and troph means feeder. So an autotroph is a self-feeder. It makes its own food. These are your plants, all right? Some of the microbes that we talk about, like Euglena, which does photosynthesis. Those are our autotrophs. They make their own food. When we talk about photosynthesis, we're talking about using energy from the sun in order to make glucose, and then the plant breaks that glucose down to make ATP, just like we're going to talk about in cell respiration, or at least very similarly. There's also something called chemosynthesis, and chemosynthesis is kind of a subset. It's why I say there's 3, not just 2. Chemosynthesis is pretty cool. It's where you take energy from your surroundings, either in the form of heat or in the form of some chemicals, and you use that to drive your own cellular reactions forward. So some of the organisms that live around the deep sea hydrothermal vents that you might have learned about in earth science, they are chemosynthesizers or chemosynthetic, which is pretty cool. There is a lot of speculation that life may have actually originated through chemosynthesis, right, at one of those deep sea ocean vents, which is just an interesting thing, all right? Now, heterotrophs are the other type of, or the other class of animals as far as how they get their food. So there's autotrophs and there's heterotrophs. The prefix hetero means different, all right? And troph, again, still means feeder, so these are different feeders. They get their energy from other organisms. They may eat plants. They may eat plant eaters, right? Any animal that eats something else in order to get its food is considered a heterotroph. Some animals, right, eat just autotrophs, like a cow, right? It eats grass. Grass would be an autotroph. Other organisms, right, eat those cows. Like I love steak. Steak is delicious. I'm eating an organism that ate an autotroph. So the cow gets its energy from the grass. I get my energy from the cow. There are also organisms like fungus. Fungus absorb food from their surroundings using a pretty complicated root system. There are unicellular organisms, right? Uni means one, so unicellular is a single-celled organism. They can either eat other organisms like amoebas do. They may also generate some of their own food like euglena using photosynthesis. So they could be an autotroph, all right? Some organisms do both. They can both eat something that's around them or they may be able to generate their own food. So when we classify how organisms get energy, the big takeaway is this. There's autotrophs and there's heterotrophs. Autotrophs make their own food, either by photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. Heterotrophs get their energy from other organisms, either by eating them directly or absorbing them as they decay. And when we talk about energy, all right, we're talking about the ATP molecule. So in biology, when we're talking about, this requires energy to happen in the cell, what we're really saying is there's going to be some movement of ATP molecules. Now, ATP looks like this. This is a diagram. It's not, obviously structurally accurate. It doesn't show the chemical structures, but ATP has two basic parts. It has an adenosine head on the left, which is made of adenine and ribose. Ribose is a sugar. I know that it's a sugar because it ends in OSE. And adenine is actually a nitrogenous base, okay? On the tail side, on the right side, it has these three phosphates. And this phosphate is the most important one. Now, phosphate is this molecule right here when it's by itself. It is PO4, phosphorus with 4 oxygens. And we have to draw it in brackets because it has a charge of -3. When you put a bunch of negative charges next to each other, we know that they repel. Now, you can put 2 next to each other, tag them together, and they'll be okay. But the moment you add this third one, and you make it a triphosphate, so that's what the T stands for, the triphosphate, this little fella right here, this bond that's holding it together, is really unstable. And whenever you break or make chemical bonds, you're either storing or releasing energy. So by having that third unstable phosphate on there, this molecule is primed to release that last phosphate and allow you to get some of that energy back. Now, ATP gives up that last phosphate, sometimes called P, sometimes called PI, all right, to do work. When it gives up a phosphate, it becomes ADP. So ATP is triphosphate. So this right here means tri, as in 3. ADP is adenine diphosphate, right? So 2. You can add that phosphorus back to ADP and change it back into ATP. That's what your body does when you undergo respiration or photosynthesis. So the phosphorus in your body, the ATP in your body and the inorganic phosphorus that's associated with it, it actually just keeps getting recycled. So you break that last phosphorus off, you do some chemical reactions, then another chemical reaction comes and it regenerates the ATP. It takes them, puts them back together, and that molecule is ready to use again. Kind of think about it like ATP is a charged battery, ADP is an uncharged battery. Now, it does make up a cycle. The cycle is pretty simple. If you start down here with ATP, so we'll start right here. This will be position number 1. I have ATP. It's the charged battery. I go do work, and this phosphorus, or PI, inorganic phosphorus, comes off. It's broken. Now I just have ADP. This would be the second stage. I've done my work. ADP is dead, right? It's uncharged. Can't do any more. So I take another phosphorus, and I put it back on. But this step right here requires a reaction, or in real life, reactions, multiple reactions, multiple steps. Photosynthesis can do it. That's one way. Another way would be respiration. There is actually a third way, right? We can pull from that other slide. If you do chemosynthesis, that would also be a way you could put that phosphorus back on. And so it goes around and around and around and around and around and around. That's the ATP-ADP cycle. Now, we keep talking about respiration. What is this respiration? Well, respiration is the way that we break down our food molecules in order to release that energy, to make ATP. Glucose is the, favorite food of your cells, but you can actually put any of the macromolecules into this process. You can put nucleic acids, amino acids from proteins. You can put fatty acids into the ATP generating reaction chain. But glucose is the one that your cells want to use the most. Before you can get to respiration, you actually have to do a step number one, and that step number one is called glycolysis. All right. Now, there are some differences in the way that different organisms undertake cell respiration, but all of the organisms that use cell respiration start with glycolysis. And glycolysis breaks down glucose into two pyruvate molecules. So let me draw this for you. It's pretty simple. We know that glucose, right, pretty simple, is a hexagon. That's how we draw, that's how we drew it during the macromolecules. Glycolysis is just going to cut it right there. And this three-sided molecule, can't talk. This little bridge-looking molecule, the top one is called pyruvate, and the bottom one is called pyruvate. So when you split that hexagon in half, you get two pyruvate molecules. Glycolysis does two things. The pyruvate is going to go on into the mitochondria, and the mitochondria is going to use it in order to start cell respiration. Glycolysis is also going to make a little bit of ATP, which is nice. Now, when it makes ATP, maybe you've heard the phrase before, it takes money to make money, right? You have to invest in order to get some kind of return. Well, the first thing I have to do is I have to spin 2 ATP in order to start glycolysis. So it costs me 2 ATP. But when I break that glucose molecule into pyruvate, I make a total of 4 ATP. So if it costs me 2 ATP and I make 4, right? Well, I make a total of, my net product is 2 ATPs. So every time I go through glycolysis, I make 2 additional ATP molecules than I had before, and I make 2 pyruvate molecules that are going to go over to the mitochondria and be used in our cell respiration. Now, in order to actually get this to happen, I have to move electrons. And electrons, they have to be shuttled, right? They're like kindergartners. You don't ever, if you have 40 kindergartners, you don't just say, hey, go to the cafeteria. Yeah, that doesn't work. You got to shuttle them along. They're like herding cats. And electrons are the same way. You can't just say, hey, you're free, go to the right place. You have to shuttle those along. So there are 2 main molecules that do this for us. The first one we're going to talk about is NAD+. NAD+ is a molecule that acts like a taxi, and it's going to move a pair of electrons and also a hydrogen atom along our kind of reaction pathway. Now, if you took honors, we would go into great depth with this. Just for now, here's what we need to know. NAD+ is an empty taxi. NADH is a full taxi. So NADH is carrying the electrons. It's a full taxi. And NAD+ is empty. It can take some electrons. Those electrons are going to move through something called the electron transport chain, which we're going to talk about in the cell respiration video. And it actually turns a pump that makes our ATP in the end. If we look at glycolysis as a diagram, this is basically what it looks like. We have to spend 2 ATP to get glycolysis started. So we're going to start here. There we go. And then we're going to make 4 ATP, and we're going to make 2 full taxis, and we're going to get 2 pyruvates. That's a good thing. So we've got taxis. These are headed towards, we call it the ETC, the electron transport chain. We're going to learn more about that soon. We've got 2 pyruvate. They're headed to the mitochondria. And if you've heard that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, you're about to learn why. We've also got 4 ATP. These are great. We're just going to put a big check there. These are useful for energy. So those are the 3 things we make. So remember at the beginning, I said, hey, we need to know the big picture of glycolysis. This is the big picture. You spend 2 ATP to get it started. You make 4 ATP. you make 2 NADHs, and you make 2 pyruvate. So this slide, I'm going to put a big star right here. This is the big picture for glycolysis. Now, once glycolysis is over, there's like more steps, okay? There's 2 things that can happen. If oxygen is present, that's really important. If oxygen is present, then the pyruvate can go ahead, move into the mitochondria, and we'll make a bunch of ATP. We're going to talk about that in another video. If oxygen is not present, well, then we're at the end of the road as far as glycolysis is concerned. We're not going to go into we're not going to go into cell respiration, and instead, fermentation is going to occur. Now, you might be thinking, well, if there's no oxygen present, I'm kind of screwed, right? I mean, I breathe oxygen to stay alive. There's none present. You're saying that's not good. Well, in the long term, yeah. In the short term, you actually have some cells that go without oxygen pretty regularly. So anytime you work out, you've probably experienced lactic acid burn, right? So when you're working out, it's like, I feel the burn, or you're trying to do curls or doing pull-ups or something like that, and your muscles start to physically burn. Well, that's actually because they're running out of oxygen. They're not making ATP through cell respiration, and because they still need energy, they've flipped over and they've decided, hey, there's no oxygen present, but we can still do fermentation to make a little bit of energy. So fermentation is anaerobic. So this is a really important word. I'm going to put a box around it. All right, it's got 2 parts. I'm going to draw a line right there. So on the right, we have aerobic. Aerobic means with oxygen. When you put this prefix AN in front of it, it means the opposite of, so without oxygen, anaerobic. Fermentation is anaerobic, which means your body can do it when there's not enough oxygen. Now, in our bodies, we do lactic acid fermentation. It makes lactic acid. That's what burns your muscles when you're working out. Some organisms, like yeast, use ethyl alcohol fermentation. This makes ethanol. This is like actually how you make, booze, right? Liquor, beer, whatever it is. The alcohol in it is made by fermentation. So yeast in that solution of sugar and water and all the other stuff, hops, right, and stuff that's in alcohol. The yeast in there, there's no oxygen present. It is fermenting the sugars in that solution, and it actually makes ethanol, which we then filter and drink. Oh, sorry, went a little bit too fast there. We don't do ethyl alcohol fermentation as animals. Otherwise, every time you work out, you would get drunk, right? I mean, like, think about that. That would be a really poor evolutionary adaptation, right? I'm running out of oxygen. My muscles are burning. I'm trying to, climb up this, volcano or whatever it is. Like I'm under stress, and now my muscles start to make alcohol, and it would immediately enter my bloodstream, and that's not good. So lactic acid fermentation is a way we can kind of cheat the lack of oxygen. We still make a little bit of energy, and hopefully, right, our muscles can finish that last rep or whatever it is that we're trying to do so that we survive. You definitely want to know the 2 types of fermentation, lactic acid and ethyl alcohol. You want to know this bullet right here. We want to know this bullet right here, okay? This is a good slide for test and quiz questions, okay? So, all right, that's the end of this video. We are going to look at cell respiration, so what happens to that pyruvate if oxygen is present in the next video. All right, so if you have any questions, let me know.